Today on the AUN podcast, we're sitting down with Sean Burton, CEO of Cityview.
My first job was actually not in real estate, it was in politics.
Cityview's been getting a lot of positive coverage in the last few years, being recognized as the most prolific multifamily developer in Southern California. You effectively took over Cityview at a certain point.
So I was going to say, our model was great until the great financial crisis hit.
How are they developing in Los Angeles when everyone's running away from this market?
I'm really proud of the track record we built. We've done over 150 projects now. We continue to be ranked as the largest in LA County in terms of multifamily.
You'll hear how Sean and his partners built up the firm from the ground up, how they recovered from the GFC, how they're giving back after the fires and helping to rebuild communities, and how he personally served as a Navy intelligence officer to give back after 9/11.
I always tell investors this, we don't have some kind of secret sauce magic, but I think we can make really informed decisions about where the opportunities are and what can get done and what can't.
You won't want to miss this. Sean Burton, CEO of Cityview. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's
good to be here.
Pleasure. I'm excited about the conversation. Want to talk about really how you built Cityview, right? The podcast is all about institutional real estate and building up companies that do great real estate projects. And Cityview's been getting a lot of great coverage over the past few years. Congratulations on that. But
Thank you.
I want to take it back a little bit.
Sure.
Your start in real estate was not what I typically see from a lot of CEOs in real estate. So you go to UC Irvine.
Yeah.
After that, you go to DC. Tell me about your time in DC.
So my first job was actually not in real estate, it was in politics.
Okay.
I had worked on the campaign when Bill Clinton ran for president in '92 and ended up taking a job in the White House when I was 21 years old and actually worked on healthcare policy and doing briefing materials. And I got to travel all over the world and it was an incredible place to be. But I made a decision when I was there that I needed to go back and get more education, get more experience if I really wanted to be impactful. And the kind of smartest, most thoughtful people I met had either come out of law or out of business.
Sure.
So I made a decision to go to law school.
Great. How long did you spend in DC?
I was there about a year and a half, a little bit longer than a year and a half.
And then you go to NYU.
Yeah.
And then coming out of that, you say back to DC or going to big law?
Yeah, I decided to try to do a little bit of both. So I went to the private sector,
right.
But I went to actually work with Warren Christopher, who had been Secretary of State under Bill Clinton, and he was now in private law practice. And so I went and worked for his firm and started my career there and was there for about 3 years and loved it.
Yeah.
But I got recruited by one of our clients to go in-house. I'd worked on a big transaction for Warner Brothers. We were buying a big film library and a lot of late nights and weekends with that team.
Sure.
And they had said, why don't you come on board and kind of join full time? So I made that jump, but I didn't come in as a lawyer. I came in kind of business affairs.
Sure.
And within just a few months was kind of an investor and business person.
I mean, that's the dream for a lot of lawyers, right? They're waiting for that phone call. You did everything right. You got the phone call. But Warner Brothers was not real estate, right?
No.
So what are you doing at Warner Brothers?
Yeah, so it was really investing. It was in corporate venture capital and business development. I was working for Kevin Tsujihara, who eventually became CEO of the firm. And it was really interesting. We were looking at the future of entertainment and technology and figuring out, where we could play, what made sense. So we were very early making, investments in digital video recording, not in TiVo, but in its predecessor.
Cool.
We were very early into gaming. I spent a lot of time in Asia and Europe. And it was just a really dynamic time and interesting. But I didn't have a passion for entertainment.
Sure.
And I think to be really good at something, you have to have a passion for it. So I made a decision I wanted to continue to invest, but really go back and do some of what I'd done at O'Melveny and other places, which is to work with cities, work with communities, and work on real estate transactions. So that's kind of when Cityview came about.
And the integration between real estate and communities is like a perfect fit. So your time in DC. So you leave Warner Brothers to form Cityview, or it was an existing platform?
Yeah, I co-founded it. This was 2003, and so we were 3 or 4 years into the cycle at the time. But there was kind of a housing shortage, as there is now, and Cityview was formed to build housing in urban areas, in cities, in kind of premier suburbs. And, that was very exciting to me. And there's only 3 of us, and we had a small kind of separate account from a pension system.
Yeah. That was CalPERS?
That was CalPERS, yeah. That was
So
CalPERS.
you were part of these emerging manager program,
Yes.
right? Did you form Cityview knowing that you would get that check, or you built it and they showed up? How did that happen?
So it was all happening at the same time. I mean, I will say that I didn't, quit my day job
Right.
until that
very
document was
responsible of
signed.
you.
Yes, and especially because I had two very young children,
Sure.
and my wife said you got to have a paycheck.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I joined right as we signed the separate account mandate, and it was great. Although I went from having a corner lot on the Warner Brothers office and running into Rob Lowe and Jennifer Aniston in the gym because they were there filming, to a small cubicle in Santa Monica,
stuffing envelopes, doing whatever
just doing whatever it took to start Cityview. But it was kind of a bet on the future. It was a bet on myself. It was something I was passionate about, and that was 22 years ago.
But walk me through it a little bit. So you're at Warner Brothers. You don't really have a real estate background, but you are having discussions with CalPERS about getting this placement.
Yeah.
How do you persuade CalPERS that there's the credibility there to write that check?
Yeah, well, there were the other co-founders of the firm had more real estate experience than I did, and I had a little bit of real estate experience as a lawyer, and I had a lot of investing experience and experience managing deals and deal flow and those kinds of things. So I came in really to do acquisitions and business development. The other principals who started the firm, one of them had been in real estate for 25 years. Another had been an elected official in the housing space. So there was a lot of knowledge there. And what they were missing was kind of the young guy to come in and go hustle and get deals done. So that's the role that I fit into.
And deals at that time is not taking down assets. It's writing checks and placing money with other operators. Was that the idea?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so we started out as an allocator, right? So we would partner with builders. We were just doing for sale housing because that's where we saw the most acute need at the time, and we were trying to work in what they used to call infill locations, city locations, and do smaller projects. It wasn't kind of multi-million-dollar real estate. These were starter homes for folks.
These are single-family homes.
Single-family homes, townhomes. We did some condominiums at the time, and we were trying to address the housing shortage. And so that was our.
So these must be communities, right? You're not doing onesies and twosies here.
No, yes, they were.
The major home
150 to 300 unit communities. And just in California is where we started, and then we eventually expanded in the 5 western states, and then we eventually expanded all over the country.
So you're writing LP checks, and by the way, you're the business developer.
Right.
How do you pick winners and losers when you're going out to partner? Because first of all, it matters to you, but you also have CalPERS money, and you need to be successful.
Yeah, and we needed CalPERS sign off on those things.
Yeah.
So what we would do is one, obviously, just we had a thesis about where people wanted to live. Where did you have strong demand in terms of job growth and demographic growth, and a workforce that could afford housing, but then also where were you not building that much? Where was there kind of strong demand, weak supply, which is still our thesis today, kind of 22 years later. And so we focused on that, and then we would try to find the best builder or one of the best builders in that submarket, and really spent a lot of time underwriting them, because we learned you can't have a good deal with a bad partner. It's not just about the real estate, it's about who's going to execute it for you. And so we spent a lot of our time doing that, and then we found that we would start to do repeat deals with those builders. That's kind of how
almost a programmatic situation. Rinse and repeat, right?
Exactly.
The idea of targeting the market first and then finding best-in-class builders is very different than being persuaded by a builder who's frankly motivated to. So what were some of those communities in all Southern California?
We started in Southern California. We did our first deal up in the Central Coast in Santa Maria, which is a very difficult market to build in. We did a deal here in LA and Inglewood, near before SoFi was there, but in that area. We did some other deals in the Bay Area. Then we expanded, and we were in Seattle, and we were in Denver, and Dallas and Charlotte, and kind of all over the country.
And all the while you're relying on your real estate, vintage partners to, look at the model, look at the pro forma. I mean, you've been investing for a long time, but real estate is relatively new to you at that point.
Correct.
But you're learning all the while, through all these experiences.
We definitely had some wonderful expertise in the firm. Again, we were partnering with best-in-class builders, which makes a difference. We just really hustled to make sure we understood what we were doing, and it was a great experience. And we really felt like we were part of helping to solve a problem, which is address this kind of massive housing crisis and housing shortage.
And so at what point do you pivot, or you effectively took over Cityview at a certain point? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was going to say our model was great until the great financial crisis hit.
It was great until it wasn't.
In 2008 and 2009, and a number of things happened. Obviously, for sale housing was right in the teeth of the financial crisis, kind of right in the bullseye. And then we had a lot of our partners who were great partners who were overextended. They didn't have the capital to meet their commitments. A lot of them ended up having to give their projects back to us. And we realized at that point that we just weren't close enough to the real estate, that we needed to be more hands-on. And so we made a couple of different decisions. One was that we were going to vertically integrate the firm and no longer be an allocator, but really do the development and asset management and property management on our own. And that took a long time to build, but that was a decision. And the second decision we made was really to switch from doing for sale housing to multifamily. Because we felt multifamily was a much more stable asset class for institutional investors. We had a number of pension systems now investing with us and commingled fund structure, and we'd expanded the firm quite a bit. And we thought that's a better fit because of the more stable cash flow and more predictability. And so those were kind of two of the big changes we made in 2009 and 10.
Did you take back any broken projects? I mean,
we took a lot of broken projects.
You guys
back.
had to finish those, get them across the finish line?
We either had to sell them or finish them, or some were partially done, or we had to reprogram them. I mean, one of our projects we had was going to be a small townhome project down off PCH in the South Bay, and didn't work at all with what happened in the great financial crisis. So we actually went and bought the car dealership next door and re-entitled it all for garden-style apartments, and ended up, making a profit for our investors. But we had to be very creative. It was in the midst of all this that the president of the firm left and decided to do something else, and the partners asked me to become president of the company at that time. And I like to say it was like being promoted to captain of the Titanic after it hit the iceberg, because it was a really tough time in 2010,
I'll take it.
2009 and 10. But it turned out to be, the best kind of career opportunity in my life. So.
Well, after that, I mean, it's all easy. So you're taking back these projects. By the way, you talk about we pivoted and we built out a GP platform effectively. I mean, people spend an entire career in real estate and never do that because it's a completely different business. You built an entire different business. So when is that happening? 2006?
No, later than that. It was after the great financial crisis. So I would say really it was about 2011 or so, after we'd become de facto GPs as we had to take these projects back. And we made a decision, we're really going to invest and build out the platform. So we said, let's start with development, because that's really the core of what we do. And we're going to hire development executives, and they're going to come in and help us build this part of the firm. And then after we did that for a couple of years, we said, okay, now we need construction management expertise. And we built that out. And then the last piece was really 2018 when we built out a property management arm. We were probably 10 people in 2009 or 10 when the crisis hit, and now we're 200. So that you could see we've expanded the vertical integration of the platform.
That's a complete deal changer. And by the way, when people talk to me about what I see in the market in terms of winners and losers, the ability to completely vertically integrate without relying on third parties. Everybody wants to, outsource and save a little bit of money, but there's a cost to that, actually. So I'm not surprised that that's been a big part of your success.
And it's not easy to do. I mean, we had some misfires, and we did it over time because we wanted to do it organically. We thought, do we buy somebody and integrate it? But we wanted to inculcate them in our culture. So we did it, over time, kind of deal by deal. And
I'm smiling because you make it sound so easy, but I can just imagine the brain damage that was involved in so many steps. We can smile about it in retrospect, which is an incredible thing.
But I think it's one of the best decisions we made as a firm because, again, it made us closer to the real estate. We're allowed to control our own destiny in many ways with these projects. And we turned out that we attracted a whole new class of investors who didn't want to partner with an allocator. They wanted to partner with an operator directly. And so by having that expertise, it really kind of opened the world for us.
As I mentioned, we were supposed to sit on a panel together 6 months ago. Scheduling didn't happen. We're sitting down today. But at the time, and still, Cityview is getting accolades as being the most prolific multifamily developer in all of LA, maybe in Southern California. That puts a smile on my face because you guys are doing everything right now. But I know that just comes through years and years of putting your head down and doing the work.
Well, we have a great team, and that's something we prioritize and have built that team over a number of years. And we also have a team that's got a lot of gas in the tank. So all the senior executive leadership team, as we call them, everybody's in their 40s and early to mid 50s. And they have a lot of experience, but they still want to do this for a while. So they work very hard, and I'm really proud of the track record we built. We've done over 150 projects now. We continue to be ranked as the largest in LA County in terms of multifamily, and that's proud. But we're also very heavy in the Bay Area and Denver and Dallas, and recently expanded back into the East Coast, kind of Orlando up to Boston.
Let's talk about LA for a second. There's so much hate going on LA development. As a real estate guy, I'm born and raised in LA. I love the city. I'm not blind to everything that people are talking about. I see it all the time. I still think it's a great city, and it pains me to think that it's this hard to develop. How are you guys doing what everybody says cannot be done?
So I think you kiss a lot of frogs, right? As part of do a lot of deals, and again, we've been doing this a long time. We stick to our knitting. We're not trying to do data centers, or we're not, building these, high rises in the marina. We really stick to, we kind of entry level multifamily and workforce and kind of first tier up. I spent a lot of time in working in city commissions and those kinds of things. I was on the planning commission for a number of years and was president of another commission. We hired the head of planning who had been head of planning for LA for 12 years, but head of planning for New York before that, the only person who's ever done the two biggest cities in the world. He's been a partner since 2007. And so we spent a lot of time really figuring out what are the right deals to do. And if we think if we're not the right party for a deal, or we think it's going to be too difficult with the elected officials of the community, we move on to the next one. It's just not worth it to do. So that's been our strategy, and I think why we've been able to have the success we have.
But I'm getting this undercurrent of service. Frankly, I mean, maybe people don't want to talk about it, but at every turn of the way that you've developed the business, you're thinking about what does the community need. If we approach the project from that perspective, everyone's going to do well. The community's going to do well. We're going to increase housing. Cityview will do well. I just, learned a short while ago that you actually spent time in the Navy as an intelligence officer. Talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, so I was in the Naval Reserve for 8 years as an intelligence officer, and I'd consider when I was in high school going into the Navy after, going through the academy or an NROTC program, and ultimately the decision not to do it for a number of reasons. But I always wanted to serve. My father had served. He was a bombardier in World War II. Amazing. And so I kind of had service in the blood. And then when we were attacked on September 11th, I wanted to do something. I had a 1-year-old, and my wife was pregnant with our second, and so she wasn't crazy about the idea of me just, going off to Afghanistan. But I did some research, and a friend of mine was involved in the Navy, and the military had created a direct commission officer program to address critical communities and needs, communities within the Navy that they didn't have enough of. So intelligence was one, doctors was another. There's a number of them, and so. With this program, basically you went through a kind of a sped up version of your basic training and your officer candidate school.
You went through basic training.
So the reserve version,
Sure.
So it's much shorter, but I think you got a lot of the same elements.
Take the credit. You're
So I spent some time in Pensacola. It was great. At my officer candidate school, I went through an intelligence school, 2 of them. And then basically you would serve in a unit, and you would be doing kind of producing real intelligence for what they call the war fighters, Iraq and Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, and the different places we had our troops. But you would do that on weekends and then over a 17-day period throughout the year, and then you would come back and do your day job at Warner Brothers or real estate. So it was definitely interesting to take my mindset from Warner Brothers or doing real estate in LA down, to put on a uniform and sit and be on, with the SIPRNet, the secret internet, and be, producing intelligent reports that are being forwarded overseas. I mean, it was a different mindset, but one, really, really valuable experience.
Are you doing that at home, or are you going in for the intelligence work?
No, you go in, Friday nights, basically, when people were going home, I would drive to San Diego, put on my uniform, serve for the weekend, come back Sunday nights.
Incredible.
But it was really great. And the people I worked with were really inspirational. And most of them had come out of prior service. There were only a handful of us that hadn't served, and active duty, but it was really, really valuable.
Formative experience.
It was.
Honestly.
Yeah.
How long did you do that for?
I did it for 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I did it for 8 years. And I would have liked to do it longer, but I joined in 2002. So when I came up at the end of your 7th year, you have to decide, do you want to sign on for another 5 years? And it was the teeth of the great financial crisis. And obviously I just become president of the firm, and I was trying to keep everything afloat, and I just couldn't give it the effort that it needed in order to do it right. And that's not the kind of thing you want to mistake at. So I just did my full 8 years, and then I retired.
Tell me about I kind of really geek out on this stuff, the institutional nature of the platform, right? Because there are so many different types of operators out there.
That is geeking out, yeah.
Yeah, it is, seriously, because how do you walk on Park Avenue and race checks?
Yeah.
That's what I think about, because the city and, the country is full of operators out there. They want to do deals. And I'm having conversations with these guys, and it's like, I got a deal in hand. I need to go raise capital. That is not the way it works.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
You need to be raising capital every day of the year, well in advance. You need to kind of create the vessel so that that you're just ready to receive that. And that means platform, infrastructure, everything. So how did you create the ecosystem which was inviting all kinds of institutional capital?
So I think we did it backwards from what most people do. Right. Most people start investing, it's friends and family, and then maybe you move to family offices, and then you do some joint ventures, and ultimately you get institutional capital, separate accounts, pension systems, and commingled funds. We started with CalPERS, right, which is the largest pension fund in the country. So right out of the gate, we were trained by them, right, to just be very institutional in how we reported and how we thought about things. We were a fiduciary, right? That's most developers aren't fiduciaries. I don't use that word lightly. I mean, we really took that seriously.
Deal. Absolutely.
I also think that my legal experience helped.
I agree.
I mean, I think you think about things differently as a lawyer. And again, I come from a big law firm, and it had trained me in a very certain way to think. So it's kind of always been in our DNA, and I do think it's a differentiator when pension systems, insurance companies, institutional investors are deciding to invest with us. They like the institutional nature of the platform. It gives them comfort versus, I think they meet some developers and they may seem kind of looser or faster, those kinds of things. And so
it's the opposite.
Yes.
I mean, those guys walk in and you just see risk.
Right.
That's how I feel about it. And those guys are probably feeling the same way. How do you compete? I mean, I think those guys are sitting with a stack of decks. Stack of OMs, whatever it is. I mean, literally, everybody's going to those same buckets of capital. You walk in there, not only are you getting checks, but you're getting them to invest in like the least popular market in the country right now. Tell me about that dynamic.
So first of all, it's really hard, just to be clear. Like, it's still really hard, even after 22 years. It has never gotten easy. There's a lot of big firms that suck up a lot of the available capital up there. It is really difficult. Look, I think, first of all, they want their underwriting track record and experience, right? They spend a lot of time on that when they're giving you discretion to invest. When you go in with a deal, they definitely underwrite you as a firm, but they're really focused on the numbers in the deal. It's much harder to raise discretionary capital because they're saying to you, okay, we're going to commit $100 million to you, and all you need to do is send us an email, and 10 days later we'll send you whatever money you want, and you have to pay us back in 8 or 10 years, right? So the level of scrutiny, as it should be, is very high and very intense. But we've really been blessed to have great investors over the years. A lot of repeat business. You know, this rinse and repeat has really been valuable.
That's a compliment, right? And it speaks to your track record.
We feel very grateful for it, and blessed that people trust us with their capital. And I do think that we understand the mission of what we're doing. I used to say that, my brother has been a firefighter at the LAFD fire department for over 30 years. And he was married to a school teacher. Well, at one point we had one of the pension systems for the fire department in one of our funds. And my brother used to call me on Sunday nights.
How are we doing?
How do we do this week, Sean?
Wow.
And he was joking, but he wasn't joking.
It's so personal.
Because he'd been running in and out of burning buildings for 25 years. He hadn't had a good night's sleep since the 80s. He was living for his pension, and he wanted to make sure that, like, we were being good stewards of it. And he was joking, but I took it very seriously because it reminds me who we're doing this for. And I think a lot of times managers get caught up in other things. And we have to remember it is a sacred trust when these hardworking folks are entrusting you with their retirement of, how you have to treat them.
It's unbelievable. You're exactly right. You think it's faceless. They're not faceless. There's millions and millions of employees that have been working for decades, putting money away, and you're just trying to provide for their future. When you approach the business from that perspective, I mean, how are you not going to try to kill it for them every day?
That's
exactly. Amazing. You go in there with a mission, and I mean, how do you disseminate this to the entire organization? How do you do that?
I mean, it's from day one. I mean, I think we attract people that are mission driven. We have our core values that we go through every week with the team.
Can you tell me about that for a second? How do you do that? You're sitting in a meeting?
Every month we have we call it a Bagel Monday, where we have the entire team together, and we go through what are the major things going on in the firm, what's latest on capital raising, what's latest on deals. We'll highlight a project that we're delivering or something that's going on. We'll talk about HR issues, introduce new people. And then at the end, I give a core values award. And I go around and I call on people and say, what are their 5 core values? And then have people talk about what it means to them. And then we give out the award, someone who's exemplified that for the month. And I think it's important. And we also, I do feel like we use it, agile is one of our core values, because in this business, especially over 22 years, you have to be agile. And so you will hear people use that term in meetings as we're talking about a structure and how to get creative, and someone will refer to agile. So it is important, I think, to not just have, kind of words on a page or up on a wall, but actually use them in how you, talk about issues.
That's incredible. Yeah. We may adopt that, but we will cite our source for sure and give credit.
Fair enough, yeah.
That sounds incredible. Yeah. Really, the way that you infuse it throughout the entire organization. It's not just lip service. Yeah. Tell me about expansion. Dallas and New York. Yeah. And, it's not easy to build a business anywhere, but you've got all this core expertise in a particular market. I always worry about folks that go into different markets thinking that, this took like 30 years to understand every block and every submarket. Sure. Yeah. How is that easily transferable to other markets?
Yeah, so it's not easily transferable. So that's the first thing. So we started in California, then we went to the 5 western states, then we went to the whole country. Mm-hmm. Then when the great financial crisis hit, we came back west and we said we're really going to hunker down and focus on kind of rebuilding, especially as you vertically integrate. Yeah. Right, because it's harder to do all the work than just be an allocator in these different markets. And so we built back up to the kind of western half of the country over the last decade or so. And then right about in the end of 2019, early 2020, we were doing our planning for the future, and we had made a decision for a number of reasons we wanted to expand and do the rest of the country. And we had, thoughts about how to do that, like especially hiring local teams, working with local partners who understand that block by block and kind of leveraging off their experience. And then COVID hit, and that threw a wrench in everybody's plans, as you would imagine. So we didn't make that kind of expansion decision. We pulled back, we focused on our existing assets, and then, what the opportunities were coming out of COVID. And really in 2024, we decided again to do that. And we ended up, started with, good hires of people who have experience. So we, hired a great executive in Texas who had a lot of experience to kind of run that office, and a lot of relationships, knows, drive through Dallas with him and he knows every building and every story behind it. Yeah. And same with Austin and some other Texas markets. And then we hired an executive who used to be the CEO of Allianz Real Estate for the Americas, who we had a relationship with and knew us well. He was looking for the next opportunity, and so he's anchored the East Coast for us. We hired another executive who used to work with him, and now we're hiring an analyst there, open a New York office on Park Avenue, right in between all the capitals, so we can run up and down with my briefcase.
Exactly.
That's how we're doing it, kind of, starting with people, and then, we went through a very detailed market study process. We hired a third-party market study firm and spent almost a year looking at 55 different variables across the whole country and really picked, kind of a handful of markets on the East Coast that we think kind of meet our Cityview thesis about what's a good place to invest in real estate. And that's where we've started the investment process.
We launched our New York office about 3 years ago, and the feedback that I received was, Alan, do you think there are not enough real estate lawyers in New York City? How does this make sense to you? Are there not enough real estate operators, developers in New York where there's room for Cityview? What's the thesis there?
Yeah, so first of all, we've decided to stay out of New York City for investing because there are a lot of real estate families and a lot of developers there, but New York is the center of capital probably for the world. Yep. It's got fantastic talent, and it's a great launching point for all of those East Coast cities that we think make sense. And and again, we're not trying to do all the deals. We're just trying to do a handful of deals in each market that make sense for us. And there's lots to be done.
And it starts small and it grows. Small. Yeah. Everything just takes time. Yeah. Let's bring it back to LA for a little bit. Sure. Tell me a little bit about the regulatory environment. Yeah. I feel like your background in politics and your commitment to service already puts you ahead of the pack. Yeah. People are banging their heads against government. And if you can navigate that, which it sounds like you guys have been successful in, that's the game changer. Tell me a little bit about your approach to dealing with the city and what the environment's like.
Yeah. So, we've been doing it a lot. And, because we have a firm that has a lot of experience, people that have a lot of experience and relationships, it doesn't mean, by the way, that we can get things done that other people can't. I always tell investors this: we don't have some kind of secret sauce and magic, but I think we can make really informed decisions about where the opportunities are and what can get done and what can't.
Yeah.
And so that's really where the action is. And so we passed on a lot of deals early on before we really spent any money because we say it's just going to be too difficult. We work very closely with elected officials and communities. I mean, my 5 years on the Planning Commission was really invaluable. And before that, I was president of one of the area planning commissions. So I spent almost a decade sitting on the other side, hearing from community members about what they want. And I saw a lot of developers come before us and real estate operators, some of whom were great and some of whom were terrible.
Sure.
And you kind of learn a lot of lessons that way. So we work very closely with the community. We bring elected officials in very early on to understand what their vision is for the neighborhood. They know the community groups. They know the politics. They know what can be done and can't be done. And so that's really how we've approached it. And there's just certain things we won't take on. You know, we've never done a deal in a coastal zone because we've said the risk with the coastal commission is simply too great. No matter how great the deal looks on paper, it's just not worth it.
Right.
There's people who do it and make a lot of money at it. We choose to put our efforts elsewhere.
Yeah. So in California, it hurts to take your most beautiful asset and not develop up and down. But if it's like a facade, it's just not achievable.
Yeah, exactly. It's very tough. It's not for the faint of heart, for sure. And then we try to use our experience, and I try to use my relationships to really try to affect policy change to get more housing built. So I spent a lot of time talking to elected officials, talking to the mayor, talking to council members, talking to whoever listened to me about what we need to be doing as a city and as a region in order to spur housing development. And so it's a big part of my service today is spending time on that.
And tell me about the receptivity there. Are you educating them on the issues, or because they're dealing with developers all day, you're finding them to be sophisticated and really understand where the pressure points are?
I think there's various levels of sophistication. I think there's become a recognition that we have a housing crisis, that housing is not affordable for the vast majority of Angelenos or Californians. I think there's a recognition that rents are too high for a lot of folks. Then the question becomes, why is that? And so where I try to spend a lot of time explaining is really the supply-demand imbalance, and that it's not much more complicated than that. Not all the electeds agree on that front. Some thinks you really got to focus on more rent control, right, and those sorts of things. And so we try to share, a lot of reports from housing economists and other things showing that that rent control actually makes rents worse over time. And by the way, you definitely have to have affordable rents for people who are making the median income and below. But our argument as a way to do that is to really supercharge housing production, right? And I think all too often the focus is on kind of government subsidized affordable housing, which is necessary, but it's very expensive to build. I mean, if we're at Cityview and as a market rate dealer, if we're building a brand new 5-story building here that's fully market rate, you could maybe do it for somewhere around $500,000 per unit, right? Because LA is very expensive. It'd be half of that in Dallas. When the city has built affordable housing, they're building at $800,000 or $900,000 per unit. So it's very expensive, and so you can't do that without real government subsidy. And
walk me through that. Is that because the builder is going to be able to recover less rent? I mean, why does it?
It's because you need to get public funding streams in order to build it, because the economics don't work. You can't get a market rate return and attract capital at those rents, right? So you need government subsidy, which is fine, but with government subsidy comes a lot of additional requirements. You have to use prevailing wage. You have to,
which makes it more expensive.
It makes it maybe 30% more expensive to build this. And then you need multiple funding streams, so it takes much longer to build, which is more expensive. And there's often a bunch of additional requirements as part of it. So it's necessary, but we can't solve our problem just with that. The number that everybody focuses on is the regional housing needs assessment, which is where the city and the state negotiate and come up with a number of how many units need to be built every year in order to kind of achieve equilibrium in housing. So that number is 57,000 units per year in Los Angeles. If you were going to build all of that affordable, you would need $30 to $40 billion a year for the government to come up with to do. It's impossible, right? So you have to attract private sector capital. About 2/3 of that needs to be market rate. And then if you build market rate housing, the more you build of it, the lower rents are. And then the people in rent control and affordable housing, they can ultimately move out of that as they grow in their careers or their families grow, and they can afford that. And then it creates more space. It's a filtering effect.
Is that population growth, 57,000, or is that old units coming offline?
It's a combination of things. It's demographic and job growth for sure, but it's also a number of units go obsolete every year. And also, we're already starting in a deficit. So we don't have equilibrium today, which is why housing is so expensive. So it's a real issue, and we're supposed to build these units. So generally, the rule of thumb is you want to build about 3% of your stock every year to make up for demographic growth and obsolescence. We're building a fraction of that in LA and are projected to build a fraction of that, which means the rents are just going to go up over time, unfortunately.
I think you guys have also pivoted to a little bit more value add and not straight development the way, maybe your Genesis was. Tell me about that transition.
So we do about half value add and half ground up development. And that's important for us. I mean, development's probably more of our brand, and those tends to be the sexier projects that you put on the front of the brochure. But if you really want to be part of the housing solution, the vast majority of multifamily units are built, but they still need investment, right? They need a new roof, or the common areas need to be updone, or you have to do the air conditioning again, or the units need a makeover or refresh in order so they don't become slums. And so about 50% of what we do is value add and 50% is development. There's very few firms who do both of those things. And we think it's actually a real differentiator, competitive advantage. You asked me earlier, when there's all these stacks of real estate firms, how do you differentiate yourself when there's all these other opportunities? And one is that we have this opportunity to turn the dials between development and value add depending on conditions. So there was a time where it made sense in 2017, 18, 19, even the beginning of 20 to develop because there was so much money coming in value add, it was getting very expensive. And we wanted to add to the stock as population and jobs are growing. Then when COVID hit, and especially when interest rates went up, you could buy value add deals at a deep discount to build them. So why would you build? It didn't make sense. So we were able to invest in a lot of value add then. And just in the last 6 to 9 months, it's starting to make sense to develop again. So we're able to kind of turn those dials,
That's
which we
agile,
think is
as you were saying.
That's a good, yes.
How much has cost of capital impacted your business over the last few years? Interest rates have gone sky high. For a while, there was a significant mismatch between the bid and the ask. That's why it was a challenging couple of years. What are you seeing now in the market?
So it's incredibly impactful. And I want to say that I'm not sure anybody realized how impactful the fast run up in interest rates would be. We hadn't seen that in a generation. From the biggest, smartest players to the smallest, everybody got impacted. And it was really a squeeze of, if you had any sort of floating rate loan, your interest costs really tripled in a project. So even if you delivered products on time or on budget, or you hit your rents or whatever, you had a huge increase in costs. Also, you had a lot, insurance really went up during COVID. Labor costs went up significantly. So those all really impacted deals. And then at the same time, because interest rates were higher, cap rates went higher as well, and really hurt your exit. So it's really been a squeeze on the real estate business generally.
We've known a lot of people who worked for a decade getting equity in a variety of deals, and they got wiped out. I mean, it's pretty devastating. We don't talk about it because they're not super sympathetic characters, but a decade's worth of work got wiped out.
I think you've seen, the last couple of years, you've seen a lot of really senior people at really big firms leave. Because they don't have any promote or carry anymore. That's disappeared, and the people refer to it as a decade of lost promote or carry. But look, that's part of the business, right? That's the risk that everybody takes. And there's good years as well, but the cost of capital is really impactful. Look, I think it is coming down. I think you're seeing more deals get done. Development has started to make sense again. You're building at higher yields than you did before because land prices have adjusted. We're definitely in the camp at Cityview that it's going to be higher for longer. We think the 10-year treasury is really what matters in our business, and we think it's going to be in this kind of 4 to 4.5 range for a while. And predictability is probably more important than just a pure rate. When it's volatile, that's when people get caught short. And so I think you're going to continue to see real estate investment, but it's the cost of capital is really impactful.
You mentioned cost of insurance. And I know that Cityview's been at the forefront of really trying to address some of the housing challenges that came out of the fires. Talk about that for a minute.
So we actually started a new business called Genesis. You said Genesis earlier. Started called Genesis because we wanted to be part of the solution coming out of the fires here in California. And most people in the country don't appreciate how devastating those fires work. And I think I've mentioned this to you before, but my brother, who was a firefighter, used to tell me about the worst fire in the history of LA, which was 1961, the Bel Air fire, Santa Ana winds. It was such a bad fire that Building codes changed after that. Fire operations changed. Equipment changed. Everything changed after that fire. In that fire, we lost 486 homes, right? We lost 12,000 plus,
Just devastating.
right, a year ago, right?
Yeah.
So it's just so devastating to the region. And we were doing a lot of work with the mayor's office and others, trying to help them come up with a playbook of how to recover and what to do. But ultimately said, what can Cityview as a firm do? And as we looked across the landscape of victims, we felt we could help most in Altadena. And as we talked to people in Altadena who'd lost their home, they were emotionally distraught. They hadn't signed on for this. It was really challenging to figure out what was going on with their insurance company, what was going on with the settlement. With
the banks, right? The lenders, the mortgages.
The lenders, I have to still pay my mortgage. What does this mean? I don't have a house. Where do I live? And then they didn't know how to rebuild the house. They were concerned about cost overruns, getting taken advantage of by a contractor, and they were concerned it would take years.
Yeah.
And what would the quality be? So we created a product. We're not investing at all. We don't invest a penny of dollars. We just help people rebuild as a contractor for them. And what we do is we studied the 6,000 homes that have been built there and realized that 4,000 of them, about 4,500 of them, were between about 1,000 and 2,000 square feet, and that would fit on their lot. So the county has a policy that says you can build within 110% of your old footprint and basically be expedited. So we created 6 different floor plans and 4 different elevation styles, so 24 different products within 1,200 to 2,200 square feet. And we went to the county and we got those pre-approved over a number of months.
Incredible.
So then we were able to go out to the community and say, if you're interested, here's 24 choices. And by the way, you can add an ADU if you want, and you can pick some finishes and do some other things. And we will guarantee you the price. So the day we start construction, we'll sign a contract, we'll set the price. If there's interest rates go up or tariffs go up, like, we will eat that. You don't have to worry, so you have peace of mind. And then we'll guarantee you delivery within 12 months of when we start construction. And if we don't, we will pay you every day a penalty for not delivering, and then we give them a 10-year warranty. And it's we feel really good about it. And it's interesting. One of our colleagues at Cityview, she lived in Altadena and her house burned down. So we moved her and her husband into one of our apartment buildings while they got on their feet. And she worked in a different part of the company. She was actually in property management. And she came to us and said, this is an incredible product. Can I leave the property manager and come work and help rebuild my community? Wow. So we brought her on as kind of the main point person with the community. And we now have 30 homes that we've started building. And we started the first one yesterday, sticks in the ground. And we think we'll do 80 to 90 this year and hopefully help hundreds and hundreds of people rebuild.
Just rebuilding a community. That's incredible. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. Tell me about financing on that. How does that work? Is there a kind of, just curious about how the program works. If you're a home builder, you want to sign up for that. Are they going out to their own lender and getting financing?
So a variety of things. Our team spends a lot of time with the homeowner at the beginning. We almost call it like being a financial therapist, because we help them talk to their insurance company, talk to the lender. A lot of institutions, frankly, are maybe taking advantage or really pushing hard on these people. And so we can step in and help and say, you can't do that, and here's what the document says. And
it's like advocacy. You guys are just stepping into all
the lawyer and me coming out.
It has nothing to do with home building at all.
Exactly.
But you will not talk to my client that way.
Exactly. So we help them figure out, like, okay, here's what you can get from insurance, and we've talked to your lender, and here's what you can do. And okay, so you have a gap of X. Let's help you figure out where to get that gap. And there's different programs for that. We also work with some nonprofits. So we really try to help them navigate and make it as stress-free as possible. Yeah.
Tell me about the next 5 and then 10 years for Cityview.
Yeah. So we're pretty excited about the kind of growth and future of the firm. As I mentioned, we opened the Dallas office 2 years ago. We opened the New York office. We've building out those teams. We're launching our next vehicle to raise capital. We're down to the last 10 or 15% in our existing vehicle. The country has about 7 million too few housing units. And again, we want to be part of addressing that issue in all these cities that have the strong demand and the weak supply. So our team's excited and looking forward to the future. It's never easy, but we think it's going to be a pretty good vintage from an investment standpoint. It's been a hard 5 years since COVID, but we're really starting to see, starting in 2025 and into 2026, some really good buying opportunities for investors, and so we're pretty bullish about the future.
That's incredible. Well, I'm not surprised at all by the success. What I see, first of all, you guys are doing good. all over the place, and you're focused on excellence.
Yeah.
And if you do that consistently through cycles, you're going to do well. So congratulations on all your
Thank you.
success. Thank you for coming in today. I really appreciate it.
This was great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.